Howdy, everybody. Welcome to Zero Trust, the meaning behind the buzzword. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes, but hang with us. We're excited to have everybody here. All right. We'll give it one more minute and we'll get this rig rolling. How's it going, Jeff?
Living the dream.
Living the dream. All right, let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Zero Trust, the meaning behind the buzzword with Acquia. Excited to have folks here to talk a little bit about Zero Trust. Quickly, the goal of today is to, Zero Trust has been around since 2009, and it kind of fell out of favor in favor of some more low-hanging fruit, easier to implement cybersecurity implementations, but it's come back up. This is a really buzzy framework that a lot of federal agencies and commercial companies are talking about. We at Acquia work in Zero Trust quite a bit, so we felt like it would be a good opportunity for us to talk a little bit about what we do and how we do it, and also kind of what Zero Trust is and what Zero Trust isn't. So we're going to get things going and talk a little bit about who we are, why we're here to talk about Zero Trust, and what we do. Quickly, agenda. We'll introduce ourselves, Mac Wertenberger and Jeff Bond. We'll talk about what Zero Trust is, why Zero Trust is beneficial, what Zero Trust isn't, what kind of guidance exists out there for federal agencies and commercial firms that want to address their Zero Trust maturity, and then how to do that. Quickly, who we are as Acquia. We are a cloud and cybersecurity digital services firm. We work primarily with federal partners, some commercial customers as well, on digital transformations and initiatives. And part of that digital transformation work in several large federal agencies and their Zero Trust journeys. I am joined today by Jeff Bond. Jeff, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. So, Jeff Bond. I'm the CISO over here at Acquia. I've been with the company pretty early on, about 2 years now. Previously, I spent most of my time, about 15 years or so, working with the DoD. Done everything over there from just basic analysis, security analyst type work to systems engineering, architecture, and a few years supporting some large customers with their Zero Trust transformation. And then I came over here and started my work with some of our customers doing primarily Zero Trust. It's been a fun ride.
Awesome.
Mac?
Yeah, I'm Mac Wertenberger. I am a security architect at Acquia. And I also work with some of those larger federal customers supporting their Zero Trust journeys. I'm pretty new to cyber, so it was pretty great for me to jump into a framework that's pretty misunderstood. Not a lot of people know what Zero Trust is. I've been really lucky to work with Jeff, who's been a great guide. And if you're going to start somewhere, start in a space that no one else understands, so you can become a subject matter expert really quickly. Zero Trust is super complicated, so it was a great space for me to learn and grow. And it's been wonderful to take that knowledge and apply it to working with some of our large customers on these big, long journeys. Jeff, do you want to talk to us a little bit quickly about really what Zero Trust is? I know I introed it briefly, but can you get a little bit more in depth?
Yeah. So on this slide, we've got the NIST. So NIST put out their 800-207 technically, but their document on what Zero Trust looked like. It was one of the earliest federal documents on what Zero Trust is, what it should look like, what you should be able to do with it. I put the definitions in this slide. I am not going to read them because it's a lot of words. Anybody who reads NIST documents know that there are a lot of words, and if you want to read that, feel free, go ahead. It's actually pretty good, but it is also one of the earlier ones. Generally, though, it is zero trust, as defined by them, is a change from the traditional perimeter security. So the security that we're all used to, that's built on castle walls and things like that, to security based on context of the person, the identity that's doing the requesting, the actions they're taking. It's more than just that like one-time single factor authentication identity proofing. And then they also have the zero trust architecture term, which is really just the concept of zero trust applied to your actual system. So those are the two like main definitions that we'll really be working with, let's say, during this presentation. We'll get into some of the other things that folks may have heard. It's used in marketing, that's thrown around as zero trust, and we'll talk about that later.
Well, and that's been one of the big struggles that we faced, especially recently, is, we're defining zero trust based off of these really big, extensive frameworks, but then it's also kind of caught fire in the commercial buzzword marketing space. And those aren't always the same thing, right? There's a lot of conversation around like, this is zero trust, but we know that zero trust is really complicated. So hopefully we can shed some light on that. And I want to drill down into that traditional security a bit. Something, Jeff, that you say a lot is how traditional security is kind of that stop sign mentality of like, stop, you can't do this. And what happens with stop signs?
Right, exactly. I mean, I don't know about you, but I will admit I don't always stop at a stop sign. I think they're used too often. They're the worst, laziest traffic control methods. They're appropriate sometimes, but they're just used too often. And it's the same with cybersecurity. When you have those kind of gates that basically stop anybody from doing what they're doing, even if they're supposed to be doing it, that's when people start going around it, not exactly listening to it. That's rolling the stop sign effectively in cybersecurity. And it's frustrating to, I think, everyone involved.
For sure.
I prefer yields.
And it kind of builds that whole castle and moat thing where, you build these really strong walls that are supposed to stop. But if you choose to roll through the stop sign, that piece of metal on its stand is really pretty useless. And we talk a lot about, you've got the walls of Jericho bullet on this. If all you're doing is building up this really robust perimeter defense, this stop sign, if that fails, you are suddenly in a world of hurt. So let's talk about, what zero trust kind of offers in terms of security enablement.
Yeah. If we want to go back to just real quick, I think some of the things that we want to touch on, and some of the ways that zero trust kind of differs from the traditional security paradigms, also touches on so it's not talked about a lot, but as you move up your zero trust maturity, when you start applying it more and more, and move up in your maturity levels towards what a lot of frameworks accept as optimal, you get to a place that almost democratizes your security. So in this paradigm, the owners of certain systems or certain data, their responsibility areas, they should also be in control. Not completely. There's still guardrails and things to help you out, but effectively the owner of something should be in control and should be able to set the security on whatever they're responsible for, which is probably making some security folks very anxious. I know we don't want to lose that control, because that's how we protected things. That's how we guaranteed them. But when you have these systems in place that kind of have these guardrails, and you build a system in which there are layers of protection, and you're not only I know we talk a lot about just in general, not just zero trust, but having everybody, engineers, software developers, everyone should be responsible for security in some way. This is a good way to help get you there. Um, it makes people feel responsible for those things, and changing people's view of security and their involvement in the success of a security program is a huge part of zero trust. And I think that's one of the big changes that comes with it if it's being done right.
Yeah, and the education piece is something that we work on a lot. It's not just shipping your security out to your dedicated security team. It's making sure that people understand, what their responsibility is with their data, with their access to data, and moving that in a more kind of holistic. We throw the term paradigm shift around a lot, but it's a paradigm shift towards everyone understanding that, like, okay, this is how we're addressing this. It's not this team over here's responsibility. It's my responsibility to kind of be the custodian of my own environment. Right.
Exactly. And that's that kind of shifting of responsibility and getting people involved is not, I don't want to say the opposite, but it is, let's say, supportive of some of the goals of security, those enablement functions. So like when you start going into and applying zero trust principles, it is those things that enable the users, empower the users through some of that control, through some of the processes where security stops kind of acting as gatekeepers. It doesn't hold up work as much. I'm sure everybody's been in those situations of having to request access and going through multiple teams and just having your work be super delayed, which nobody wants. It's frustrating. It just encourages people to implement, shadow IT and go around security controls. And it is not what you would say is best practice.
Yeah. And that, like, as a security services firm, like, we deal with that a lot. Like, this impression that the security team is going to be, or the compliance team is going to be, the wet blanket, the one that isn't focused on business objectives and instead is kind of a hindrance to that. And there are, I think that's one of the most exciting things about zero trust, is there are opportunities to use your term, democratize that security piece, spread it out. And then if everyone's doing it in real time, it doesn't become a lag. And it seems like this is a good time for this shift because of the kind of the post-pandemic environment where, I'm not sure our industry, the tech industry, is really ever going to go back to everyone on-prem. Remote work has become the new normal. Cloud infrastructure, cloud hybrid infrastructure is the new kind of standard of the way we're building our systems. It seems like this is a really good time for us to make this shift.
Absolutely. Especially for us as a company. We're, a more startup, small company. And our goal as a company has always been to hire the best people in the best positions to do the best work. And that doesn't always mean that they're all geolocated in one place. And zero trust, when applied, can really enable that remote workforce. So we're going to look a little ahead in your zero trust journey of not needing things like traditional VPNs, and so where those decisions to approve access are done based on who you are, how you proofed your identity, where you're accessing something from, how you're accessing it. Like, all these factors go into approving your access to something or not, that some of those traditional controls and security methods just aren't as useful anymore. And it makes it a lot easier. It makes it so we can be remote. You can travel. I mean, I've heard it. It's frustrating, I think, for me, and it's frustrating and confusing to most, let's say, non-engineering, most general workforce people. Um, security people tell them all the time, like, don't use public Wi-Fi. Don't just click on links. Don't. But a lot of things that we do kind of show against that, and the things that we use. So, like, telling people that is more frustrating, and it's more stop signs. And zero trust helps when implemented and optimal. It helps people get work done where they need to, when they need to, and as quick as possible.
Yeah, it's all about reducing friction, and making sure that if things are centralized and centrally managed enough, like it should go smoothly. We kind of eye roll when we hear things like single pane of glass, because it's sort of another buzzy marketing term, but it's this idea of having visibility into all the different parts of your system so that we're streamlining and adding efficiency to processes that are really important, and not putting a bunch of silly barriers in place that don't actually secure an environment. Because, to your point, people are going to roll through those stop signs. People are going to work around. People are going to spin up, virtual machines so they can get around certain things, because it adds friction to their work, and they can't work as efficiently and as fast as quickly. If we can remove that, I think that's one of the things that people get really nervous about with zero trust, because it touches so many parts of an ecosystem. But when you get to that optimal stage, like you were talking about, suddenly a lot of those barriers fall away. And what you're implementing is that really critical work that needs to be done, and it needs to be done smoothly and efficiently. And it really can drive that, which is awesome. And makes those kind of faster targeted responses when there are issues possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. Yeah, you touch on that single pane of glass, which I know. I think this was before you were really in the tech field. So I think it was, from what I remember, it was about 2019. I'm bad at time, but it was about 2019-ish, where all the vendors, that was the buzzword. That was the buzzword of the year. And it felt like more of a just a way for like vendor lock-in and things like that, where get our tool and everything is our tool, and then you can just look at one place and get the information you need. And that is a great idea in theory, and I think that's where zero trust really brings that into a more practical sense, because it's not a like super clearly defined line item in zero trust concepts and architecture, but a fundamental piece of zero trust is that interoperability. So when all your tools can talk to each other, that gives you one place to interrogate those tools to get that's where that, the GRC reporting, your response agility, which I realize now sounds just like responsibility. But it gives you that way to, respond to investigation audits for your ATO approvals, or your authority before you go live, proving you're secure, or when an incident happens, responding to that, whether it be, isolating a machine in the network, revoking privilege tokens, things like that. When all your tools can talk to each other, you can handle that in a much faster, much easier way. And you get a lot more context into what your other tools are doing and seeing, which gives you better fidelity of your environment and the ability to respond, I guess, more accurately to things that are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing that I've worked on a lot on my specific project is detections for identity issues. That an identity is the new perimeter. That's kind of one of the things people toss around a lot if you're paying attention to zero trust. And it's incredible what addressing our identity and maturity did for us, for our customer, we were able to take all these logs. We were just getting these barrages of logs. We couldn't really determine which ones needed attention, which ones were critical, which ones weren't. But adding a little bit of that zero trust flavor in there really quieted the noise, and we were able to identify things that needed attention, and honestly, like, ignore the things that didn't. Those got pushed even further back, and it saved a lot of toil for our incident response team, because they were able to automate some detections as code and really decrease the amount of noise coming from those detections, which was awesome. Like, a great practical way that a pretty simple zero trust concept enabled some of that efficiency. And I do, like Jeff, have to add in another buzzy thing. This seems like it's really set up for AI machine learning as well. Like, it seems like the table is set to adopt some of these other, like, very buzzy new things.
Absolutely. I hadn't really planned to talk about that because it's a little further down the line, but that does the AI ML integrations and things like that. I mean, your models are based on the information that they're trained on. So the more information that you can give a model and the more accurate information that you can give a model, the more accurate and useful its responses can be. So that's where part of zero trust is building up that that foundation, that basis, so that when you start applying, your ChatGPTs, your LLMs, they actually become more useful. I don't know. Again, this is before your time, but there were early, AI models really early on, back in the like AOL days of instant messenger, that just provided like basic responses. And now they're trained to understand language a little better. But even those first GPT models were fairly basic, and it just had, basic language understanding. There wasn't too much inference or creation of new information. But as you feed it more, and then especially when you get to those specifics and train it on specific things, the output that it provides to you becomes a lot more useful. And eventually getting to the place where these models, these systems will be able to directly interact with, let's say, certain aspects of your system that, you would allow it to, of having something of like, maybe it detects something and then it chooses to isolate a machine or isolate an identity. And then you can go back and basically double check the work. So it can reduce response times to incidents or problems dramatically. And that helps keep things from spiraling out of control, or, things like ransomware from getting to all of your data. Like, imagine the system that sees the encryption start on this data, and it's like, that doesn't seem right. And then it stops access or stops allowing before you lose the ability to get to all of your data.
Someone that does on-call, that sounds awesome.
Mm-hmm. And I think to your point of that identity is a new perimeter and some of the identity work, that kind of gets into what zero trust isn't as well, because it's looking at it in just that's definitely an aspect. And it's a really good way to start your zero trust journey, but that isn't zero trust as a whole. If you concentrate on just that, you're missing huge swaths of what should be involved in your zero trust architecture, in your zero trust journey. There is a big part of zero trust that's just about data, labeling, controlling, knowing where it is, And identity is a great place to start because usually your identity is lacking behind quite a bit. So starting there is great, but you should always keep in mind that it's not the end.
Right. And that's what we want to really stress, right? Is the holistic nature of zero trust. And if you are going to try to address zero trust, you've got to address all of it. And it can get kind of tough when people drill down too much on single pillars and you end up with those kind of siloed walled garden approaches where maybe you're really robust in your network, but if your data is undiscovered and uncategorized, it's tough to get past that. What do you see as some of the big challenges that people face as they're starting to look at bringing zero trust into their systems?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to skip over the big challenge of it is a monumental shift in not just the technology, but the people. The people are a big part of your zero trust journey, and getting folks on board with those initiatives, teaching them, having them learn about what zero trust is and how it'll actually help them, like getting those business enablers. So those people who control budgets, who control different aspects of the system, even, you have subcontractors and things like that. Getting all these people on board with this kind of this shift. I'm trying to think of the word and I've forgotten it. But this shift into looking at security a different way can be really difficult, and it's one of the big, let's say, barriers to starting or moving along one of these journeys. I think the other thing, and this is what not concerns me, but I think frustrates me the most, is that we have, and I'm not going to call anyone out, but there are, there's vendors in this space and they're doing what they're doing. They're businesses, they're doing a good job, but they have taken some of these ideas, and because they were fairly misunderstood from the beginning, there's kind of offshoots of it. So when you look at like some products that provide zero trust, what they're saying is that they provide zero trust network access or architecture, which ends up pretty much being a VPN replacement. A lot of these things you can add other services and features to that expand their capabilities quite a bit, but a lot of times it's still just effectively a fancy VPN. And to really go down and get some of the benefits of zero trust and to mature in your zero trust journey, you need to address multiple areas of your environment, of your I was going to say pillars, but we haven't gotten to that yet. We'll introduce that in a moment.
Yeah. It's not a bolt-on. You can't bolt on zero trust. It's got to be a fabric of your environment shift. It's a paradigm shift. And that's, to your point, I think that's what blocks a lot of people from starting that journey, is they're like, wow, I've got to start back, kind of foundational and really think about where we could implement this in the kind of core DNA of what you do, as opposed to just like caving to the temptation of like, here's a shiny tool that's promising me zero trust maturity if I implement it. But to your point, that typically is only addressing one pillar, one aspect. It's not as holistic as we know well architected, well designed zero trust can be. And you miss out on some of the opportunities for efficiency and centralization that way, right?
Yeah. And I do want to call out that when you say bolt on, that doesn't necessarily mean that in your zero trust journey you can't reuse what you already have. You don't have to scrap everything.
Right.
There's a lot of opportunity to continue using the tools that you're using and are familiar with, but supplementing, adding to that, whether it be through some of these commercial vendors and products, there's a myriad of open source tools that also enable a lot of different zero trust things. There's a very good community around zero trust, and there's a lot of options at different budgets and different capabilities that you can use to progress yourself along your path.
For sure. Should we talk about what some of the frameworks that folks are leveraging to guide their zero trust journeys are?
Yeah, I think that's good. So when we talk about that path, that's because zero trust is kind of defined by concepts, functions, capabilities. It can be hard to wrap your head around a lot of these things, especially if you want to measure your progress and know where you are, know where you want to be. So some of the things that CISA and the DoD have done is actually create frameworks. Now, multiple places have. I know Microsoft has their own framework. There's a lot of frameworks, but the ones from CISA and the DoD are generalized enough, still very useful and fairly simple, not in a bad sense, but constructed in a way that is easy-ish to understand, or at least not as complicated as a lot of other things. NIST doesn't have an exact framework. They discuss the zero trust architecture in 800-207. But again, it was one of the earliest ones, and it was very based heavily around the network, because that's where zero trust really started, was around those micro perimeters and software defined networking. And that's what zero trust was for a while, back in when it came out of the Jericho Forum and went up through Forrester and stuff. And it's kind of expanded now, and CISA's model and the DoD model are both mostly based in NIST. So they are very similar. So the CISA, we have them pictured up here. The CISA one has 5 pillars and then 3 they call cross-cutting functions, which are basically just the foundation. So those are 3 capabilities that should be available in each one of the pillars.
Right.
Mm-hmm. While the DoD basically has all of those things being separate pillars. So it's 7 pillars. They are slightly different, but they are functionally the same. Either one can be used. Personally, I came from DoD land. That's what I like. DoD has a lot of good supporting documentation to help you as well. They have their own reference architecture. They have strategy. They have some plans. And
they just released their crosswalk with NIST 853. So
yeah, so they've worked it into the RMF and the 853, all those controls that you would get from 171 and all of those. So those kind of map back, and that makes it a little easier. Sometimes it gets you a little ahead, but in general sense, and what it seems, OMB and some of the executive orders, they're basically for non-DoD. If you're federal, then it's easiest to use the CISA model, the CISA maturity model, their framework. It's a little more generalized, and you can also use it if you're not federal. It's a good outline of a plan that you can follow to create your own plan.
And we're saying that it's more general, but it's still pretty complicated. I think the challenge that we face sometimes working with our customers, even when we're looking at balancing between CISA and DoD, is just like, where do you start that journey? Where do you start that kind of roadmap piece? Let's skip to this one. How do you get there? Like, how do you begin that process?
Yeah, and that
Where your children are.
I I think that can be the hardest because there are so many places that you can start. Um, I think one of the biggest things is having, a realistic timeline. Um, you have to know, not necessarily know, but have an idea of what kind of budget and how long some of these things will take. Um, I feel like that hurts a lot of my IT modernization, security. That is what hurts a lot of projects the most is those unrealistic timelines because that is a good way to get yourself in trouble. So one of the things I feel like to remember with zero trust is that it is larger than you think it is. Um, it will probably take longer, and it's something that kind of never ends exactly. Um, it's the same as when you think about your modernization. Things change all the time; they get better. So it's just something that you should always kind of keep in mind, and especially if you're starting from scratch, let's say, or you're changing the way that you've been doing things forever. Like it's going to take some time and effort, and that is okay. It doesn't mean that you won't see benefits along the way, just that it will take some time. I know you're laughing at that was my childhood, was this PSA, comes on TV at 10 p.m. asking where your children are. And that is, so I put that there because one of the most important things in creating your zero trust journey is knowing what you want to protect. So there's a concept in zero trust. I say DAS, but DAAS, and that is. Oh, sorry. I clicked on a thing and it changed everything.
Oh dear.
Yep.
Data, assets, applications, and services.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you. I don't know what happened. Okay. And knowing what you have and what you want to protect is a big aspect of zero trust. One of the fun things, and I say fun because I like doing it. I know we have a team internal to Acquia that does it, but it is an often overlooked aspect of security, but threat modeling.
Mm-hmm.
So that can also be what feeds into your threat modeling, and it can help you know what you need to protect because you can prioritize your systems, your data, and that can help you direct your zero trust investments better.
Right. Knowing what's critical, right? Being able to look at like, okay, so we've got Internet of Things, we've got a printer over in the corner. Is that as important to protect as our main server stack? What are the mission critical pieces of what we're doing? And how can we prioritize our resources, our time, our money to make sure that we're addressing zero trust security as it pertains to those elements of our business, as opposed to getting too overwhelmed with addressing every single piece? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. That is, I mean, you summarized criticality analysis pretty well. But yeah, that's one of the important things is directing those investments to the proper place and not just, so part of that criticality analysis is not just what's important to each team or some engineers, but is linking that to the business objectives. So going through your zero trust planning will actually help you get, your executive, your C-suite buy-in, because you can show that the security that you're implying, that these investments will actually help the business, or at least not hurt it, but generally will help the business. And you'll be like, oh, we did this and this is why.
Mm-hmm.
Like if we need to sell this widget, these are the things that need to be online, protected, available. we should direct our investments here, and that will give us the most benefit for the least investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up when they're trying to start this journey on their own, right? Is there's a lot of frameworks, there's a lot of analyses, there's a lot of real estate to cover. And that's a place where our work as folks that work in zero trust every day has really been guiding those conversations and allowing teams to see like, hey, this can be something we leverage. I feel like every day we're seeing a new massive data breach because people were doing some things, but they weren't doing all the things. And maybe they weren't doing the important security things where it absolutely had to be. It's, are you using MFA in the right places? Are you micro segmenting your system correctly around the most important stuff? So there is a lot of value to be added by saying like, hey, we're going to address this. We're going to take on this really big project. To your point, Jeff, going to folks like you and saying, hey, CISO, like this is important. We want to do this so that we're not the next big breach. And this is the plan, and this is how we can add value to our company. But that's a hard journey to start if you don't have kind of SME guidance along the way. As we start a criticality analysis and we look at something that I do a lot, which is gap assessments and evaluating a system and evaluating an environment and seeing where those soft spots are that we need to harden up. What is your experience with that, and how do we kind of work through that process?
Yeah, so that's where you start applying all these foundational things. Those your DAS, your criticality analysis, that inventory that you create, conceptually anyway, that inventory that you create from evaluating your own system, then helps you apply to a gap analysis. So we found that gap analysis is pretty much one of the best ways to communicate some of these business goals, to outline the project as a beginning and North Star for your zero trust journey. And just generally good advice for any transformational technology project is to know where you are and where you want to go. So in this slide, I've grabbed the effectively the gap analysis for DoD zero trust strategy that they published. So as you can see here, they break it down. Again, they're using the DoD framework, so they have 7 pillars. So this is kind of a top level view of, here are the 7 pillars of zero trust. Here is where we are in our maturity, and here's where we want to be. So those darker bars are where the DoD wants to be. And then it's also on a timeline. So they know when that they want to be there. So that can help them direct their investments and some of the things that they want to or need to concentrate on first. So this helps to create your project plan, as well as it's the basis. You can then break down each one of those pillars when you're doing this and planning for it and measuring your maturity levels. Each one of those pillars breaks down into functions or capabilities. So what your system should be able to do. It doesn't tell you how to do it. Wouldn't that be cool? But what it should be able to do. So that's where you can measure how far you are in your journey, because there's different levels of, effectively, like how automated is it? How centralized is it? How
Context.
Your governance, your like how many guardrails are there? How many functions is it capable of doing? And that's where you can use that information to basically build your roadmap to where you want to be and know where you are at the time.
And something that we work on a lot with customers that are doing gap analyses and gap assessments is trying to find those things that are really interoperable. So if we're looking at the device's pillar and trying to get maturity from initial to advanced, can we prioritize implementations that are also going to improve maturity in network and environment or application and workload? Because often, if you scratch one back, it scratches another. A lot of it, because the nature of zero trust is centralized and orchestrated, it often behooves us to look at where those Venn diagrams cross over and spend a lot of time and resources to make sure that we're choosing implementations that can improve kind of holistic maturity.
Absolutely. So I know you did this for your customer. I know that you were doing gap analysis for them for some of their zero trust journey, and I think that was focused primarily on like one aspect of a pillar, right?
Right. So, a big piece for us was looking at identity and how could we address what wasn't very robust maturity and identity in a way that would trickle down and raise maturity in other pillars. So we prioritized two implementations, one being FIDO2 phishing resistant MFA for access to secure systems, and then privilege access management. So looking at all of our privilege roles and digging into how those roles were accessing certain environments, certain data, how we were logging that, how we were alerting on that, and then hopefully enabling phishing resistant MFA on top of all of that. So, that specifically addresses user, that's like the low hanging fruit is, okay, that's all user work, but actually it improved maturity in devices, it improved maturity in network. And then when you get into some of those cross-cutting functions, you look at automation and orchestration. It was great to be able to say, we ended up suggesting our client go with a hardware security device to implement phishing resistant MFA. And that improved maturity in a different area. Visibility analytics, if you address privilege access management, you enrich logs and suddenly you have better visibility into what certain identities are doing. And that helps improve maturity and visibility analytics. So we were focused on one pillar, but we were cognizant of the fact that those implementations could raise maturity and provide value kind of across the board, which was awesome. And I see we got a comment here about reframing zero trust as a business decision rather than something only the IT folks worry about. And that's exactly right. Like, we were able to improve maturity, but also leverage those improvements to look like streamlining and looking like securing. And we were able to kind of go to our leadership, our C-suite, and say like, hey, these are real security improvements. I think about environments that might have PII or PHI in it. These are things that we can say are real great selling points, not only because they make sense from a zero trust perspective, but because they are great value adds for business. So we really were able to help our customers prioritize those high value add implementations. And they got a lot of bang for their buck off of that work.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
I know you stumbled across a few things too that, in theory, they were doing, or, they were doing, but maybe didn't go as far as they should have.
Mm-hmm.
I know I see that a lot at places where people say that they do something like least privilege. And when you start going through to implement something like privileged access management, and you start really looking at who should have administrative access to these machines or those machines or that data, a lot of times you find that it's just this group, and then everybody's in this group. So they're just admins all the time. And, traditionally, just having people have, an admin role that they just always have access to and can get everything was good enough. But when you start going into your zero trust journey, you start stumbling across these things. And realizing that maybe you weren't as secure as you thought you were. And this is helping quite a bit.
Yeah, long-lived admin access that keeps me up at night. And it was, to your point, like I think that's what everyone thinks they want, right? It's low friction. Let's get people into these important environments as fast as possible so they can do the work. But as we dug into that more, and this kind of takes it back to that community education piece, we found developers that were like, I'm never really sure if I'm about to press like the big red button, and I don't really want admin access all the time. Like I want to play, I want to build, I want to do stuff, and not feel like I'm about to break production when I'm doing that. So we were able to do some things by addressing that and creating friction, but also while it wasn't really friction, because what we were doing is we were educating people about responsible use or access to these really privileged spaces. And it actually made them feel more secure because they felt like they could be in the Wild West when they were in non-production and do whatever they want. And then when they're in production, they know, and everything's vetted and they've got a lot of coverage and support. And it helped kind of across the board. So yeah, for sure. Having that holistic mindset was really important.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I think, I think the next phase is just like, okay, so we've talked a little bit about gap analysis. How deep are we getting on this? We're kind of just scratching the surface, right?
Yeah, I mean, just like anything here, we can kind of go deeper into any aspect of this. Obviously, we don't have time today, and it would likely take more than just an hour. But generally, zero trust is I hate it. Honestly, I hate it, but it's a paradigm shift. It's really a different way of viewing your security and your security enablement specifically. Security shouldn't just be, a cost center of your company. It is very beneficial if you can view your security as an enablement function to improve your company, your system's outputs, to create value. And one of the best ways that you can do that is to have a plan and to know where you want to go. That's really where that gap analysis comes in. It's a good way to get yourself in trouble to just read some marketing materials, pick some tool, and think that it would just fix your things, and you would have zero trust. It feels like a cycle that tech goes through every few years of there's a new cool product, some places implement it, and then you start to realize that it actually takes a lot more work to get set up and configure, and it doesn't really deliver on the promises that it makes. But if you look at it in that more holistic sense, from that zero trust lens of what something should be able to do, what it takes to get there, and how to get there, then it makes it more palatable from the business sense. And it gives you achievable goals going through, at least we've found, creating those gap analysis and making those plans based on, the published frameworks from the federal government, which are very useful scaffolding, let's say. But no matter what, it is a journey. It takes a while, but you come out the other end better than where you started. Absolutely.
And I like what you said about using those frameworks as scaffolding. I think that's a piece that people stumble on when there's, if you're a security person on a security team and you're tasked with implementing zero trust, to your point, Jeff, like it's easy to fall into the trap of like the buzzy tools that promise zero trust. And then you start to, let's say you do avoid that and you dig into the scaffolding of the CISA framework or DoD, it can be really overwhelming. And that's where I think our work building those roadmaps that are really tailored and targeted to our customers, doesn't make it easier. It can make it more understandable. It can make it more sustainable. It can give them step-by-step guidance that I think ultimately does make it easier. But it is cringe, the paradigm shift. The guidance that I think that we sometimes provide makes that a lot smoother for people, because it is aligned to their business needs and objectives. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle getting to that point. If folks want, so one, we're wrapping things up. I know we want to leave some time for questions. If you want to know more about gap assessments and what Acquia does specifically with our customers and how we help federal agencies and commercial companies address zero trust in a way that it feels tailored to their needs and their mission objectives, we are going to be at the Public Sector Summit next week in DC. There's a QR code on the screen. Feel free to scan, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you at our booth or field emails and questions. We are here to help. This is an important journey that I think both of us feel really strongly about, and we want to help as many folks do that as possible. What do you think, Jeff?
Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, at least I won't be at the Public Sector Summit, so I won't be at our booth. But I know that the people that we have there are knowledgeable, caring, and helpful. But if you can't make it to the Public Sector Summit either, that QR code will bring you to a page with Acquia's contact information. So you can reach out to us that way, whether it's for any type of engagement, or if you just have honestly general and zero trust questions, they can refer you to myself or Mac. I think one of the things that we're proud of at Acquia is giving back to the community. And I know we're more than helpful to, or more than willing to be helpful and answer questions about zero trust or what our approach is. We're here for you.
Yeah, because I think that's important. You know, we're not trying to sell a tool per se. We're trying to help guide people on this journey, because ultimately better security helps all of us, you know.
I think it's funny you say that, because I just saw somebody had just commented, and we have a moment here. So they're asking, they say that zero trust seems important, but it's complicated and expensive, making sense for their small technology firm. And I think to what you just said, we haven't yet. I don't think we plan to create any sort of like tool, some specific program, software, anything like that for zero trust. That's not what we sell. We want to help you on your journey through your zero trust maturity. And that is, I think, one of the things about zero trust is that it is applicable to any size, whether it be, huge multinational or small businesses. You can achieve zero trust in a way that works for you. And that is one of, I know, our goals when we work with customers, is working within budgets that they have. And that is part of that gap analysis. That's part of plotting that course on your zero trust journey, is one, using some of the tools that you already have. Zero trust doesn't have to rip out and replace things. There's also ways to that you can just add. You can add some things in small areas that supplement. And again, there are a lot of free and open source tools that you can use. Even some things that are free in the sense that sometimes it's just some processes that you can actually start implementing. And while it won't move you super far in your zero trust journey, it will improve your security. It could improve your response times, your efficiencies. And those are really areas, especially if you have no budget, things that you can focus on that will still improve where you are without being such a heavy lift.
Yeah. I love the idea of leveraging existing tech stacks to address some of this stuff. They don't, those little shifts can be some of the most feasible shifts. We got another question about determining a starting point, and it's exactly what you're saying. It's, yes, there are big, monumental, paradigm shifty things that you can do, but there's also lots of small stuff. Maybe it's, let's say you're an AWS shop, it's leveraging some of those built-in services slightly differently so that you're improving your security in a small way, and allowing those small changes to fuel bigger changes, and to kind of organically raise maturity and initiate that process of democratizing security, so that you're educating your workforce first, and then you're rolling out bigger changes, over the course of that journey, over the course of your roadmap. And I think that's something that I really like working with our customers on, is looking at, okay, what makes sense? Yeah, there's some really big things we can do. We talked about some of the identity stuff that we've worked on before, but sometimes it's the small things that can make, start those shifts and start to build that culture of shared security that can encourage, future changes as well.
Right. And to Doug's question here is, yes, the frameworks are there to help guide you. But in our experience, that's kind of after you define your protect surfaces and your criticality, because that is where you align your zero trust journey with what your business objectives are. So you can bring the concerns of your specific engineering or IT teams into that. But probably some of the strongest things that you can do is align this change with your business objectives, because you can use that to demonstrate that value, get that buy-in, and having that leadership buy-in. And then whether that leadership is, your executives and C-suites, or just your team leaders, because you don't want this friction with, you're the security team and they're the development team.
Right.
Bringing all of their concerns into it is where you can use those inputs to focus what your maturity journey will look like. So if something like identity is the most important, then that's where you can concentrate and start implementing things like single sign-ons or phishing resistant multi-factor. That is what really guides your investment side, whether that be money or time. That I think that is the real basis to creating your successful zero trust journey.
Yeah, all comes back to enablement. How do we enable business with security? And I think that this is a good platform to do that.
Agreed. I also think that it's probably a good stopping point as well, since we are at our time.
A couple minutes over.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Jeff. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Mac.
Again, QR code here. If anybody has further questions, we'd love to answer them. And if you're going to be at Public Sector Summit next week, come find the Acquia booth. We'd love to talk to you more about Zero Trust. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. Have a good day.